In the great hall of Edinburgh Castle, two teenagers, the most powerful boys in Scotland, are honored guests at a royal feast. At just 16 and 10 years old, William and David Douglas think this night will finally bring peace and secure their family's power for good. The young King James II, barely a boy himself, smiles from the high table. As the feast hits its peak, the hall is silenced by a single, booming drum. A servant walks toward the high table, but he isn't carrying another course. He's holding a platter with the head of a black bull, a clear and terrifying symbol of death. In that one moment, the brothers know. This wasn't an invitation to a banquet. It was an invitation to their own execution. This is the story of the Black Dinner, a betrayal so cold-blooded it would inspire one of the most shocking scenes in modern television. But this was no fantasy. This was real. So how does a royal feast turn into a death sentence? To get it, you have to understand 15th century Scotland, a kingdom balanced on a knife's edge. In 1437, King James I was brutally assassinated, and Scotland was thrown into chaos. His son, James II, was only 6 years old. A child king meant a power vacuum, and in the viper's nest of Scottish politics, that's a dangerous thing. Whoever controlled the king controlled Scotland. Three men clawed their way to the top of this storm. Sir William Crichton, the Lord Chancellor and Governor of Edinburgh Castle. Sir Alexander Livingston, a sharp and calculating nobleman, and the most powerful man in the country, Archibald, the 5th Earl of Douglas. The Douglas clan wasn't just another noble family. They were practically a rival monarchy. They were fabulously wealthy, commanded a huge private army, and held massive territories. These Black Douglases, as they were called, were so powerful many saw them as a threat to the throne itself. The Earl of Douglas was even made Lieutenant General of the realm, basically running the country for the boy king. But this fragile power balance fell apart in 1439 when Archibald Douglas suddenly died. All that power, all that influence, passed to his son, William Douglas, a headstrong 16-year-old. Suddenly, he was the most powerful teenager in Scotland. But he didn't just inherit an earldom. He inherited a giant target on his back. To the other regents, Crichton and Livingston, this young earl wasn't a partner. He was an obstacle. They saw the Douglas power as a direct threat to their own and to the future of the Stuart dynasty. They decided the Douglas problem had to be dealt with permanently. And so, they hatched a conspiracy, a plan to eliminate the young earl and his brother under the sacred promise of hospitality. The invitation came in November 1440. A royal summons for William, the 16-year-old Earl of Douglas, and his younger brother David, to a feast at Edinburgh Castle. It was presented as a gesture of reconciliation, a chance to dine with the 10-year-old King James II and bury the hatchet. Leaving their own territory was risky, but refusing the king was out of the question. Trusting in the sacred laws of hospitality, a celeste which promised safety to any guest under their host's roof, the two brothers rode to Edinburgh. The feast on November 24th started as a grand celebration. The young king was reportedly charmed by the Douglas boys, who were close to his own age. For a moment, it seemed like peace was actually possible. But the men who'd arranged it all, Crichton and Livingston, were just playing their parts. They had already gathered enough flimsy, fabricated evidence to charge the brothers with treason. All they needed was to get them in their grasp. As the banquet wound down, the mood in the hall changed. As the story goes, a single, ominous drum began to beat. Then, a servant appeared carrying a platter. On it wasn't dessert, but the severed head of a black bull, an unmistakable omen of death in Scotland. The hall erupted into chaos. The young King James II, horrified, begged for the lives of his new friends. But his pleas were ignored. He was just a pawn, his royal presence used to give their betrayal a veneer of legitimacy. Crichton's men seized the Douglas brothers and their advisor, dragged them out of the hall, and put them through a sham trial right there on Castle Hill. The charges were trumped-up nonsense. The verdict was never in doubt. William and David Douglas were found guilty and immediately beheaded. Legend says that the Earl asked that his little brother be executed first, so the boy wouldn't have to watch him die. This brutal violation of trust would go down in Scottish history as the Black Dinner. This brutal power play didn't bring peace, not even close. It plunged Scotland even deeper into violence and paranoia. While the conspirators tightened their grip on the young king, the murders sparked outrage. The Douglas clan, now furious, launched attacks against the Chancellor's lands, including laying siege to Edinburgh Castle itself. Strategically, the plot backfired. The Douglas lands and titles didn't go to the crown. Instead, they passed to the boy's great-uncle, James the Gross Douglas, who many historians suspect was in on the plot from the beginning. After all, he had the most to gain. Instead of breaking the family's power, the betrayal just shifted it to an older, craftier leader. Soon, the Douglases were right back at the center of power. But maybe the biggest impact was on King James II. Being forced to watch that horrific betrayal at just 10 years old left a deep psychological scar. It taught him a lesson in power, that it wasn't kept through honor, but through utter ruthlessness. And that lesson would define his reign. Years later, when he was finally old enough to rule, James found himself in a bitter struggle with that same powerful Douglas family. In a chilling echo of the Black Dinner, James invited the 8th Earl of Douglas to Stirling Castle in 1452 under a promise of safe conduct. When the Earl refused to break a political alliance, James flew into a rage, pulled his own dagger, and stabbed him. The king's guards finished the job. The boy who pleaded for the Douglas brothers had become a man who murdered one himself. This act sparked a civil war that ended only when the crown finally crushed the Black Douglases for good. The Black Dinner's legacy stretches far beyond Scotland. Its chilling mix of feasting, betrayal, and murder has echoed through the centuries. Author George R.R. Martin has said that the Black Dinner, along with another dark chapter in Scottish history, the Glencoe Massacre, was a direct inspiration for the Red Wedding in his series A Song of Ice and Fire, better known as Game of Thrones. The shocking violence, the violation of guest right. It's all there in the massacre of the Starks. As Martin himself put it, no matter how much I make up, there's stuff in history that's just as bad or worse. The Black Dinner is a stark reminder that the most unforgettable dramas often come straight from our own history books. It's a story of raw ambition and devastating betrayal, where a dinner table became an executioner's block, and a young king got a masterclass in cruelty. The echoes of that dark night in Edinburgh are still felt today. A haunting lesson that the real Games of Thrones were often far more brutal than anything we could ever imagine.